We're live. I'm a couple minutes late though. 7:05. Let me see, adjust my camera here. She got back from West Tech. Had to put all my stuff back up on my regular computer. Tonight we're going to talk about how much power. What does it take to gain in power, basically, to make a, for instance, you could apply this to anything, but tonight we're going to talk about camshafts. So how much power would you have to gain to make a camshaft worthwhile? For instance, if you had, we're going to talk about 5 liters or LSs or small block Chevys or whatever it is, but if you're running a combination that you are running currently, and maybe Richard's tested it, and so you know how much power it makes. And you ask about, okay, what happens if I put this other camshaft in? Well, what if this other cam is going to add power? And what if it adds 10 horsepower? Is that enough of a power gain for a guy to want to go to all the trouble and the expense of buying another cam and putting it in? So that's what I was thinking about. And during my long trip back from West Tech, because unfortunately on this trip, rather than being about 7 hours on my trip back, it was 10 or 11 hours, almost 11 hours. And the reason for that is because there was a big crash or something that happened. And so we were all sitting in traffic, which is exactly what you want to do when you jump onto the freeway and you're going 450 miles, is you want there to be like lots of traffic. So I got to think about a lot of stuff. And so I was wondering, we know that a lot of guys, like for instance, for LS motors, while I was down at West Tech, I did a bunch of 5-liter Ford testing. We know that doing a camshaft on those works well, and doing the camshafts on the LS. The camshaft is really kind of the thing that, especially for most modern motors, it really wakes it up. Lots of modern motors, the LS, the LT, even it can be argued that the small block at the end of its career, they usually the factory puts small camshafts in those. So when you put a camshaft in it, it can really wake those things up. But is it worth it to put, like, for instance, if you're going to change the camshaft in an LS and you go from a stock LS3 camshaft, let's say, and you put in an LS9 camshaft and you pick up 10 horsepower at the top, and you're going to trade power down low. So that might not be a good example. But if you're only going to pick up 10 horsepower, would you even do that? Would that even be worthwhile? We know at some point, if you go from on a 5.3, if you go from the stock 5.3 camshaft and put a real camshaft in it, like a 231, 247 kind of camshaft, you can pick up 60, 70, 80 horsepower, whatever. Those kinds of big power gains, I think it's easier to justify spending the money for the camshaft. Now, I don't always recommend those, because a lot of times a guy, especially with the smaller motors, a 4.8 or a 5.3, he may get those big power gains at the power peak, but he's not going to get those through the rest of the curve. And also, he's going to sacrifice other things. And so a lot of times that's not a good trade-off. But if you can get big power gains, it makes the expense a lot more palatable, obviously. But, if we can get 100 horsepower, yeah, I'd for a couple $100 or whatever, $200 or $300, whatever a camshaft costs, especially if you can put it in yourself, which, a lot of the guys here can, that makes it definitely worthwhile. So if there's no power gain, that definitely doesn't make it worthwhile. So my question is, between it's a home run deal, it's 100 horsepower, and there being no power, I guess you could even go beyond that and say, I put a camshaft in and I lost power. That would obviously not be a good idea, and that would not be a good change. But at what point, like, what is the trade-off? Is there a balance there between, do we have to look at it on a grid? Do we have to go, okay, if I got this power for this amount of money, then that would be worthwhile. So if I gained like 25 horsepower and it only cost me $25, that's probably a pretty good trade-off. But is 25 horsepower worth $250? Those are the kind of things that I ponder while I'm driving by myself. And I had somebody ask me in one of the chats if I'm a stereophile, basically, do I like the cars that have these cool stereos? And I like anything that's done really well. Like, I like the right set of wheels and tires and big brakes and suspension parts and even stereo stuff. That's not what I have in my car. In fact, my point was, when I'm driving in my truck, most of the way to and from West Tech, very rarely do I even have it on. I'm usually just doing talking to myself or doing thinking of things. So I don't normally do that, but it gives me plenty of time to go over a lot of these things and ponder them. So what I'm wondering is, if a guy is a 20 horsepower gain. And the reason I was thinking this is because I was down at West Tech doing the comparison. I wasn't able to run as many camshafts as I wanted when I was doing the 5-liter Ford testing. We were testing the new Summit E303 Plus cam compared to the Ford Racing E303, which was an emissions legal. They sold a lot of them, I'm sure. An upgrade cam for the factory 5-liter Ford cam, which is itself actually pretty good. I mean, our combination, to give you an idea, and I'm doing a story for the guys at Summit, I think, about this, and I'm doing a video on it. But the thing that and this always happens when you're doing testing, you kind of know, having tested a bunch of these cams before in the past, and I had not tested the Summit ones, but knowing what specs they are, I kind of figured where they were going to be. But the interesting thing is when you're running these tests, it's always the thing that you didn't think about, for me, where you find something, hey, that's really kind of cool. And for me, running this as cast blueprint aluminum headed 302, which I don't think there's anything, amazingly special about those heads. They're a 190cc head. It's a 202 1/6 intake valve. It's a 60cc chamber. It's not, and like I said, a 190cc as cast head. So it's not anything major. And according to their flow data, it flows 240 CFM or so. So it would be kind of like what a trick flow, an original as cast twisted wedge head would have similar flow numbers to that. I didn't look at the low lift and mid lift stuff, but that's about where the peak flow is. But the interesting thing is with this combination, I ran the 302 and it was just a Marshall engines, basically your kind of rebuild small block Ford. It was a 50-ounce balance, so a 5-liter replacement. So it was balanced for the 50-ounce dampener and flywheel, which we used on there. And then we ran it with those heads, a stock 5-liter stick cam. It had the blueprint heads on it. It had 1/6 crane roller rockers on it. We had long tube headers on it. These were 1 3/4 inch. And then we had a Performer RPM, not an air gap, just a regular RPM, and then a 750 Holly on it. And the cool thing for me was that even with the stock cam, this thing made like 368 horsepower, which I thought was a pretty good bit, given the fact that it was saddled with a really tiny stock cam, which the stock cam was only 440 lift, and they say that it's 266 degrees of advertised duration, which puts it, I think, if I did my math correctly, because I haven't been able to find out what the 50 number is there, and I'm not exactly sure what the 266 advertised number is at either, but I'm comparing that to other stuff like the B and the E and the F for racing cams. So if it's similar, that would put it in the 208 to 210 degree duration at 50 range, which makes it a fairly decent sized factory camshaft, and it worked pretty well. And that's probably why the motors ran as good as they did, given the fact that they were saddled with less than desirable E70E heads. Now you could port those and obviously make them a lot better, or put the GT40 heads on, which I will also be testing later on. But given the fact that a factory 5-liter head flows 165 or so CFM, there's just not a lot of there's not a lot of potential there unless you really were to go after them. And then we ran that combination with the E-cam and picked up about 30 horsepower, which is, as I remember from the testing from before, that's kind of right where I was expecting. The Summit cam was better than that, and I also ran the Extreme Energy cam, which was better than both of those. But and I'm interested. The cool thing about this is I was really kind of impressed with what it made from the factory camshaft. And now I'm interested to see how the camshaft that I've been recommending for years, this Extreme Energy 274 cam, I'll be curious to see how these Summit cams, which now the next two that I test, the B and the F cam, and now the Summit stuff is dual pattern, which makes sense because that makes it more like the Extreme Energy cam that I've been recommending for years. But I'm curious to see how the bigger B and F cams now compare to that Extreme Energy cam, because their version, the E303 Plus, was only a 260 degree duration intake at 50. and it had similar exhaust duration to the Extreme Energy Cam. But I think that the B and the F versions are going to be even bigger. So it might be that they make even more power than that, being dual patterns and having the, similar kind of split in duration numbers. It'll be interesting to see. And I'm also going to have to do some piston to valve clearance checking. I didn't do any with this one. I just ran it because I knew that the Extreme Energy was already in there, and it had already worked. Which now looking back, I'm kind of surprised at, because I think that this was only this short block, I think, was only a 4 eyebrow piston, just like a stock rebuild piston. It wasn't anything special. So I'm I'm wondering how the combination of a 202 valve and that Extreme Energy Cam, I'm kind of wondering how all of that fits without hitting the valves, but it hasn't yet. So that, again, lots of testing down there. Not as much as I hoped. What I was trying to do while I was there was also run fuel injection. So what I'm going to try to do is, my plan is to run these various cams through this small block Ford, and then also test them, at least one or two of them, maybe all of them. Also test them fuel injected, because there's going to be a lot of guys that want to know fuel injection, and what they do with a factory style fuel injection. I was going to also run all of the Ford GT40 stuff and Cobra stuff. I may throw a spacer in there just because guys want to know, is a spacer worth anything? The phenolic spacer, does it isolate the intake and actually cool it off? Which actually, no, that's probably not the case, because the underhood temperature is very, very hot. And so you're not isolating it from the engine very much. The underhood temperature could easily match what the water temperature is on the motor. So I don't know that it would be, maybe I can take some, and in the engine dyno, it's going to be a non-issue, because we have so much airflow going through there. It's not in a closed engine compartment. So that's not going to be, that sort of test would not be anywhere near real world. But what I'd like to do at some point, when somebody has a car that I can test it on, I'd like to take some temperature readings. Not so much charge temperature readings, because that doesn't give us an idea either. Somebody that thinks that because you're isolating that you're going to get a lower air temperature doesn't understand what the airspeed is going through the manifold, and how it does not pick up temperature from the surrounding manifold. But that'll be another video for another day. But it will be interested to see. I will be interested to see if there is actually a change in external temperature of the manifold with a phenolic spacer, to see if isolating it actually does anything when all the rest of the stuff that's surrounding is all kind of at a fairly high temperature. But the 5-liter Ford stuff interests me, because I still have one, and I like doing that stuff way back in the day. And I didn't have access to all of the cams that I tested beforehand with the, I don't remember if I tested an X cam. I may have. I know that I tested a B303 and an E303. And I think we tested the F also, and I tested the Extreme Energy Cam, tested the stock one. I think we tested 7 or 8 different camshafts, because I think we tested the Crane 2030 and the Crane 2040, which were similar to the Ford Motorsports deals. Would you test rockers with bigger ratios? We can. The thing about rocker ratios is they don't change things nearly as much as a camshaft change does. They are easier to install, and sometimes they're worth power. On a stock camshaft, rockers would probably be worth power, because we already know the motor responds to camshaft. So if it responds to camshaft, more than likely it's going to respond to those rockers. So on a stock one, we see that with the LS stuff too. When we put change rocker ratio on a stock cam, we can see power. And I even saw it when we did it with the LS7 camshaft, and we put roller rockers, and we put 1.8 roller rockers in place of the 1.7s. We definitely saw power. Now the other thing, that the bad side of that, the downside of that, is we also got into valve float a lot earlier. We didn't have enough valve spring to go with that. So that's the other thing to think about when you're doing rocker tests. You need to consider the type of rocker that you're testing. Like if you're running a stainless one, which were very common for us to run back in the day, the Pro Magnums and stuff from comp, especially for small block Fords and small block Chevys and stuff, you're running a heavy roller rocker or even aluminum roller rocker. And especially if you're changing the ratio, you have to have enough spring to work with that. The rocker's heavier, and the ratio is going to change. It's going to bring it into valve float earlier, and then it's going to be problematic. Sometimes roller rockers by themselves, if you don't change the ratio, aren't always worth power because you haven't really changed the performance of the camshaft very much. You might have gotten rid of some friction if you have a roller fulcrum and you're changing that from a slider. But even that, sometimes it's just not worth a ton of power. Everybody wants roller rockers. I remember back in the day trying to, we always wanted roller rockers on there, even if they were just bolt down ones, would still work. But then getting the valve covers to fit. So lucky for me, I had those comp valve covers that were the old Hartman composite ones, but we had to take those off, and so I had to come up with another valve cover to work with all these fuel injected manifolds when I was hoping I was going to run that. And so we used the stamped steel factory Ford ones, and those have enough room because that's what they used on the Cobras to get it to clear the bolt down rockers that they use on that application. With a big cam, if you don't lose power with smaller rockers, run them to save the valve springs. It definitely does help the valve spring. If you don't get any gain from more rocker ratio and the added lift, then there's no reason to run it because it just makes things even worse. Life starts at 7,000. Okay, so and I am excited about running this 5 liter more. I would actually kind of like I said, I'd like to run more 5 liter testing with these cams with fuel injection, so with the GT40 or Cobra or something like that. And then I'd also kind of like to do some testing with cylinder heads other than these blueprint heads. So I have a set of Ford GT or GT40 heads from an Explorer because we have the Explorer manifold also. And so I like to kind of do some testing with those just to see how far off those are. So it'd be interesting to have a stock head and then the GT40 head and then the blueprint head to see how that stacks up, even though we kind of have a lot of that information. The blueprint heads were not ones that were included in the big head test that I did because they weren't even available that I knew of way back then. If they were, I just didn't know about them and we didn't have them. I would think that they would be comparable to the other stuff that's out there, but let's go to the bottom of the cam book page and go one up if you want to drive it on the street. Sometimes you need to take more steps than that. So that's what I have planned for the 5 liter deal. And I've got some LS testing. I'm going to do something. My buddy Tom sent me out a very cool blower manifold that allows me to put a roots blower on the LS application, kind of like the low butt Cadillac one that I did, but instead we'll run I think it's an M122. I don't know if we're going to run an M112, but an M122, I think, from the GT500. So that will be very cool. It'll be another kind of low buck approach to putting boost on there, which everybody obviously loves. So that's what I have going on, and my wife just laminated this for me. This is the the build sheet for the Nova, so now it will stay all factory fresh, even though it's a little stained and stuff. If you look on my son said that this looked like the Declaration of Independence, and then on the backside, obviously, there's got to be a treasure map on it. So I thought that was awesome. Let's see what you guys got going on. What kind of power? Let's see. What did we see that was cool at the? A Torker 2 is not a great manifold. It's not nearly as good as even an RPM air gap. I'm building a 301 Chevy with a tunnel ram, 202 heads, fender roll headers, 13-to-1 compression, original. Building around a Chevy, an off-road Z28 cam. But is that what I should run? I don't. There are much better choices than that off-road Z28 cam. If you want to keep it, kind of period correct, then you could certainly do that. Oh, you're running a tunnel ram. I was going to say you got to do a cross ram, but a tunnel ram is also good too. Can you run your testing with a Holley high-rise intake? I don't know what you mean by that. How much would I get from a 454 or 305 heads going from a solid flat tappet to a solid roller the same duration, 100 more lift? The ramp rate would be a lot more aggressive on the solid cam, so I would guess that you would gain power as long as the 305 head should continue to flow up there, and hopefully you have enough intake to take advantage of that. When you did a test with different intake runner lengths, did you ever change cams in between to see how each cam would respond to various runner lengths? They respond in the same manner. It may shift the power curve up a little higher with different cam timing, and the intake opening determines the start of the reflected wave, so they can act a little bit differently. But basically, if you have a longer runner length, it's going to make more power down low, and then the others are going to follow suit. You won't find a combination of cam and runner length that's going to do something different than that. Solo Richard, new here. Do you have any experience with GM's Gen 7 8.1 liter? I have not run one of those yet. The guys, and it is a good candidate for boost because they all are. Every motor is. And the guys from Westech have run those before way back, but I've never run one. Alan, I'm working on a Mercedes M120 V12 swap. The engine came with very early dumb coil technology. I'm curious what upgrading to a high output coil and bigger plug gap would help. The plug gap is not going to help you at all. It's not going to really do anything. The only time that upgrading to a better coils will help you is if you're getting misfire. If you're not getting misfire, and if it's an individual coil and plug, even if it's early ones, those can go a lot farther, obviously, than a single coil can. So unless you're running into misfire, and if it's an NA motor, I wouldn't be concerned with it. Rick, I don't know. Oh, okay. I don't know how much you'll get going on your cam test because I don't know specifically what cam it is and what I don't know what the compression is. I don't know what the intake manifold is. I don't know any of that. Any interest in testing junkyard LS designed around ideal combos for off-road, rock, and desert racing? I don't know what kind of power curve you want for that. I don't know where you like. I don't know what the ideal curve would look like for that. But otherwise, it would be just choosing the right intake and cylinder head and stuff. Richard, did you note the base timing advance versus an 03 Cobra? I'm reading around 26 to 28 degrees. I don't know what you mean by base timing. Is that like the timing at idle or something? It's not going to be anywhere near 28 degrees under boost. Carb size for a 347 with an HR 274, probably a 750. A TR1 with two Ollie 500s. Okay, that'll be good. How important is compression ratio when picking cams? For me, it's not. The camshaft, when you go, they're looking at it the wrong way. If you have lots of compression, and then you should pick a camshaft that's going to help you run on the combination of whatever octane you have available and your static compression. So the more camshaft you put in it, you lower the dynamic compression, and that can help you with octane availability. A lot of people think because of that there is a compression ratio that works with camshafts. The compression ratio adds power to any camshaft. If you're running a stock camshaft and you increase the compression, it's going to add power. If you run a mild RV style cam and you add compression, it's going to add power. If you run a big camshaft and you add compression, it's going to add power. Even with a really big camshaft and low static compression, the motor still makes good power. If you were to run this low compression motor with a stock cam and then run the big cam, you'd see the kind of gain that you get with that big cam. You'd see the same kind of gain that you would get with the high compression. You'll just be making more power with the high compression because it will be better with both of those cams. Hopefully that's understandable. Richard, do you ever have any experience with the Voodoo cams from Lenati? I have run a few of the Lenati things. There's a reason you always recommend comp extreme energy over the Voodoo. Only probably because I've tested more of them. Richard, have you ever decided on a reference cam, like stock valve closing event, but with overlap? I don't know what you mean by reference cam. When I do dyno testing, the reference cam, I usually start out at a stock camshaft, whatever that stock camshaft is. That's a better reference point than me picking some arbitrary cam timing events, because everybody that runs a camshaft, they're going to be running a stock one. So that's the starting point. And then wherever we go from there makes more sense. Just curious, whose motors are all these that you've tested over the years? Most of them are mine. Some of them are other people's. Some of them belong to West Tech. Some of them are people that loan them to me. It just depends. It's a combination of stuff. How would you spec out a small block for your own Mustang that you kept talking about putting back together? The motor that I'd like to put in the Mustang would be an all aluminum LS, because it would be a lot lighter and it would make more power than I need, I'm sure. I don't know what I would do. I would lean maybe toward a 351 rather than a 302. But honestly, I don't know that I need to go 200 miles an hour in that car anymore. So any kind of turbocharged 302 probably would work too. Is it possible to see a result for LS drift guys, the comp cams, NSR drift cams? We could run that, but I don't know that it would show. It's just going to show power, whatever the power does. The 233, 243, 233, 243 at 50. That's an NSR cam? Is it like really low lift or something? Seems like a lot of duration for a no springs required cam. I don't know what EPS spec LS cams are. Holley high rise 92 millimeter throttle body intake on a 5 liter. That's one thing I do want to test. I want to test the Holley has a high ram for the 302, and I want to test that. I have one for a 351. And I also want to test that. My suspicion is that the high ram would work really well, especially if you have. I think it would be better on a 347, because it's going to be a short runner manifold, effectively much shorter than your typical, obviously a factory HO or GT40, Cobra, even a trick flow street burner, those kinds of things. That would be much shorter, but it should make really good power. Excuse me, especially at like 6,500 or something. We ran, to give you guys an idea, we ran a 750 on the 302 that I ran on the dyno, and we loaded it down at 2,500 with a carburetor. So it was okay. Honestly, on the street, I probably would pick a 650, just because I would be more concerned about all the drivability and stuff than whatever little bit of power that you could possibly lose. Honestly, a 400 horsepower motor works really well with a 650 carburetor. Think about getting rid of the stock 6-liter 4L 80E and go back to a stock rebuilt 454 with a 4L 80E and a 73 Nova, 14 miles an hour. Is it 14 miles per gallon in a 454 is better than 6 miles per gallon? How could you get lower fuel mileage in a 6-liter than you do in a 454? That doesn't seem right. Have you tried a Crane HT284-2 cam with GT40Ps? I have not. I don't know what the specs are on that camshaft. I'm not familiar with it. Streetcar builds, NX282. That seems like a pretty big camshaft. 565, 580, 180 Promax heads. SI glue plane. Oh, it's got to be a dual plane intake. That should easily be close to 400 horsepower. An LS short block on Facebook Marketplace, 5.3 for $300. You can go get complete motors in some places for $300 at the wrecking yard. I don't like buying like LS parts, even a short block or even a long block, for instance. I mean, I have other stuff to put it together, but I don't like having to complete it. That's why I like going to the wrecking yard, because everything's on it. All the little pieces on there, the coil packs and spark plug wires and all the things that I need are already there. And it's nice to have spares of all that stuff too. If I just throw them in my totes that I have that are all LS related. Will a comp XE268 and a 383 make enough vacuum for power brakes without a can? Yes, it will. Is it safe to spin an LS3? BTR cam, dual springs, push rods of 7,000. Yes, you're fine there. No aftermarket camshafts for this V12 engine. Do you have experience with welding or regrinding cams as far as longevity? I don't know about the longevity. We have used reground camshafts on a lot of things, but I don't think I've ever tried to run anything like 100,000 miles with it. But the guys at Schneider do really good work. They're in San Diego. Does an LS2 cam clear the L83 flat top pistons? An LS2 has flat top pistons too, so you're fine. And that's a really mild cam. Larry, I've been pondering putting roller rockers on my 350 small block 1.6s. I hear horror stories about needle bearings flying out. I don't think that would be my concern. I would be more concerned that you have enough valve spring to use those rockers. What are your thoughts about the W211? I don't know what that is. Is that a Mercedes engine or something? Power from a cam swap, it depends an awful lot on what you're swapping it into. The gains that you get from the camshaft are going to depend a lot on what the other things that you have. You would get more from the same cam swapping it versus a stock cam on a combination that has a good intake and good cylinder heads than you would if it had stock intake and stock cylinder heads. And we're going to see that when we do the 5-liter stuff. But even still, I have to say that when I did a test of the Extreme Energy 274 cam with stock heads and like a GT40 intake, and it picked up like 30 horsepower. So it did pretty good. It might have even been a little more than that. I think it's about 30 or 35. With a shift point between 6,500 and 8,000. That's a really, really big spread that you're talking about there. For 6,500, I would pick an RPM air gap. If it's more than that, I would go to a single plane. And I wouldn't pick a Victor Junior. I would pick a Super Victor. Guns. I still don't know what you're talking about. I run all of the stuff, all the cam tests that I do with stock cams. So whether that, not with an LS3, that camshaft is going to start, or that motor is going to start out with a different stock cam. I've run all of the stock factory cams, so that video is up. You can take a look at how an LM7 compares to an LS3 and an LS1 and an LS2 and an LS9 and LS7. And you can look at see how all of those compare to each other, and then get an idea on what it'll do on other combinations. So you should, all of the information that you would possibly want about factory camshafts versus anything else, all that information should be up there. $200-mile-an-hour Nova. I don't have any idea. I mean, any desire to do that. The 200-mile-an-hour Mustang, now that's something else. I noticed there's an issue with the old double hump Chevy heads, or will they crack by the rocker arm studs with the blower? I don't think if they're cracking at the rocker arm stud, that's not going to be because of a blower. Can you explain LS cam lobe design? Not quickly. Did you never run a BFG chop monster from Texas Speed? I'm not familiar with that cam. First mods for a second gen LT1. It has a good intake. It's got pretty good heads. I would put a camshaft and springs in it, and headers maybe. MMX offers a no-tune Hemi cam that supposedly adds 30 horsepower. See, I'd like to see stuff like that. I don't know how you gain that kind of power. How does the factory ECU self-compensate for an additional 30 horsepower? $1,600 for a 5.3 with 180,000 miles? That seems like a lot. I know this is engine live stream, but maybe somebody can help me. I have a 79 MGB, nice, that I'm putting an LQ9 in, nice. Looking for suspension help. You're gonna need lots stiffer springs, that's for sure. The newer Hemis I noticed have an issue with burning cams when lifters out. Is that really a thing? Recommendations on a brand and CFM rating for E85 blow-through carb 3.3 Gen 1 small block. Are you trying to make lots and lots of power? The 850 that we use from CSU works really well, and he has an E85 version of that. The only other one that I'm aware of, I think Quick Fuel might also have an E85 blow-through carburetor. Do you have a test with the 5.3 and a stock LS2 camshaft? Yes. If you look up at the video where I tested all the factory cams, I did test an LS2 cam. Justin, what do you think about the new BTR 225 VVT cam for the Gen 5 stuff? It's the 220 cam is the one that I'm familiar with, and that one I know works very, very well. Any of your cars run E85? We run E85 all the time on the dyno. LC9, BTR Stage 3, LS3 cam, VS Racing 8896. Okay. Better cam or good. For 1,000 wheel horsepower through the power glide, that cam will easily do that with that turbo. What are some good mods to build a 2004 Z71 1500 up to about 550 horsepower type budget in mind? The cheapest way to do that, I don't know what motor you have in there. If it's a 1500, I'm assuming it's a 5.3. Maybe it's a 6.0 if it's a Z71. But boost is the easiest and cheapest thing. What's a good value intake manifold for a 5.3 Tahoe after cam swap and long tube headers? The Trailblazer SS is really the only other option for you. The truck manifold actually works pretty good that's in there. Richard, I want you to build me a 408. No, thank you. Super Victor versus Parker. If you're talking about Mustang stuff, the guys at Engine Masters just tested that, and they tested the new or the latest version of the funnel web, which I've tested the funnel web versus a Victor Jr. many times in the past. I think I've done that specific test 3 times on 3 different combinations, and the funnel web was usually better. But I had an older original Terry Parker like funnel web, and he did a good job on it. For some reason, the new version that Speedmaster has now did not do as well as the latest versions, and this was versus a Victor Jr., not versus a Super Victor. A Super Victor, I think, is going to be a lot better. 5.7 Hemi Dakota back again, going with the comp cams, HRT 221, 229, 594 lift. Do I need to reduce the compression below 10.5 to 1 in a turbo application? It depends on what kind of fuel you want to use. Definitely have it intercooled. Ozarks, I'm curious about crankcase vacuum. Do you have data on performance vacuum pumps? Not different pumps, but different amounts of vacuum. Brule has definitely tested that. Does it make ring seal better? It can. It's a lot of guys that run these vacuum pumps run specific rings to work with that vacuum pump. If you're just running normal rings, sometimes it doesn't do nearly as much. Does it prevent leaks? I don't know if it prevents like oil leaks. Is that what you're thinking about doing? I don't know that it will do that. Fix or address blow by. Yeah, it would help with blow by, but it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna cure blow by. I just don't think you'd see it as much. I need a quick obtainable cam for my LY6. I had a buddy grab me a brand new SS2 and pack springs from Offer Up. Cam's brand new, but it's made by Carbay. So how did those guys get away with making that camshaft? I thought that was a maybe it's not a protected name. The Elgin cam is the original one. I don't know how the other ones do. Peter, I got roasted today for not liking Total Seal gapless rings on Facebook. I thought file fitting rings was everything. Well, a gapless ring is just is an overlap ring basically. It still has room to move, but I don't know if that those are a lot better than having proper rings in there. The rake of the car will definitely change the way the car behaves. The LY6 is an L92 head. Yep, it's a rec port head on a 6-liter with a truck cam. They do have, well, if it's an LY6, it's a VVT motor then originally. That's not fair to the head. Well, that head responds the same as the other heads do to camshafts. You'll get burned by a 5.3 with an ASA cam with 243 heads. Only if he's got lots of gear in that, I think. There should be a massive amount of used performance parts for the 5-liter. I think everyone's holding on to those. 6 liters are very high. Let me get down to where everybody is. Okay, here we go. Willie, you're running 54 degrees of timing on a small block? Wow. Probably a reason why I need pistons all the time. I've never heard of any cylinder head ever that I know of that's ever wanted anywhere near that much timing. If gapless rings work so well, we'd be using them in the upper division classes, and we don't. That's the thing. People talk about absolutes like that. Building a 6,000 max RPM 540 Brodix BB2s. Brodix dual plane manifold. Does Brodix has a dual plane manifold for that? Let's see, but you can't get my hydraulic roller cam. What cam would you suggest? Need to see a test of our dated intakes for low buck. On a 540, and you're wanting 6,000 RPM max. I'm thinking it's going to be probably a 242, 248 kind of thing, maybe, or maybe a 248, 254. That BR400 cam that I use a lot, that's a blower cam ostensibly is what they're telling it is, but I've used it for lots of different stuff. I think that one's 255, 262, and that would work okay in that. I think we've run that in the I'm trying to think, we ran that in the blueprint motor, and I think that's about where we were making power at. Is the Holley Dual Sync a go-to distributor for Terminator X? I don't know. Do you want to run sequential? I recently fixed a Gen 4 6-liter. It had piston stop and only one cylinder. Why did the cylinder shrink? Well, if you had piston slap in the cylinder, then the cylinder didn't shrink. It got bigger, or the piston shrunk. If you end up running very low compression on otherwise race engine, you'll end up needing a lot of advance. A 318 needed 54 degrees. Like we've run lots of low compression stuff, and I still have never seen anything that wants 54 degrees of total timing. Why is a TFI ignition so bad? Are they really bad? Are they problematic? I haven't done any testing on EcoBoost stuff. Not on the engine dyno. We've done some EcoBoost stuff on the chassis dyno, just programmers and things like that. On the stock LS6 cam, the LSA is 117.5 minus 2.5. Best cam for a 4.3 liter V8, 80 and an 80 Buick Century. Something small for that. That's a pretty small V8. 12-degree camshaft advance. You're going to advance the 218 cam. You're going to advance it by 12 degrees. If you ever change things that much, I would definitely measure piston to valve clearance. Type it, why did the piston shrink? That makes more sense. I don't know. Was it faulty when they put it in? Was the other possibility is that the bore was machined incorrectly, so it's been bad for a long time. It's my cherry Pepsi. Yeah, usually when people tell me that they run an amount of timing that's normally out of the range that we normally associate with the hundreds and hundreds of motors that we've run, especially on a factory balancer, usually they haven't verified TDC. And so, because a lot of times we'll just not even go by some of the marks. If we put it in a range where the thing starts, then we'll just keep advancing timing by 1 or 2 degrees and see what happens. And then does it keep going up? Yeah, it keeps going up. It keeps making more power. Okay, well, it wants more. It wants more. It wants more. We keep doing that. And then we'll go in and check it. Or we'll go in and TDC it as best we can with the motor all assembled and find out. And we find this out a lot on the Ford stuff, because sometimes guys put the wrong combination of timing cover and timing mark and damper on the combination, and so they're not in the right spot. So then we have to physically go in and if the cylinder head's on there and stuff, we have to turn it around. And you can do it if you have a TDC tool, you can do that. Sometimes we just do it with a screwdriver. We stick the screwdriver in there and turn it back and forth until the screwdriver stops going up and down. And really, for what we're doing, we're just trying to get it close, because we're not measuring within a half degree or a quarter of a degree. We're just asking the motor what it wants. So if we get the timing near zero and go, okay, it wants to be 30 degrees beyond that. Okay, well, let's advance it. Let's start advancing it 20 and see what happens. Okay, like that. So we'll go 30. Oh, it likes that still. Then we start going up. Between the 30 and 40 range is going to be normally where most of them are. Somewhere in that range. Especially for the small block Ford, small block Chevy, big block Chevy. Those guys, some of the big block Chevy can go beyond 40, 41, 42 sometimes with some of the iron head stuff, especially low compression iron head stuff. But I don't care about a number. We just keep adding timing until it says, okay, I'm indifferent now. I'm not going to break, but I'm not making any more power. And then we just bring it back down to the other value. Ray is that's it. Since every cam is a turbo cam, is a cam ever really too small if you have a big enough turbo? If you want to make 2,000 horsepower, you shouldn't have a stock cam in it, because the problem is that you're going to run into a combination where you're not making enough NA power, and the amount of boost that you have to run, the turbo is not really effective there. So there will get to be a point where there's a balance between the cam size and the effect it has on the NA power output, and then the turbo that you add to that to get to some point. If you're normally, we talk about the 1,000 horsepower range. So if you're in the 1,000 horsepower range, you can run a camshaft from, I don't know that I would do that with a stock camshaft, but anything that's like a 200 or 202 or 205 or kind of camshaft, all the way to whatever the biggest thing that fits in the stock piston to valve clearance, 231, 233, whatever it is, depending on the LSA. Any camshaft in that range, you can make 1,000 horsepower with. So a lot of guys don't realize that. A couple things are going to happen. One is the amount of boost that you have to run with a smaller cam is going to be higher than it is with a bigger cam. But on the flip side of that, the boost response on the smaller cams, and not necessarily the smallest, but the smaller cams, the boost response is going to be better than it is with the bigger cam. So if you have a 231 cam and you have a motor over here that has like the Truck Norris cam or a torque cam or something like that, it might be that this one has much better boost response and with the right amount of boost can still make more power than the other big cam. That's what happens. And the other thing that happens with dampers is that they'll, especially one that has the elastomer center section, the outer ring will spin on the inner hub. And so that's what makes the timing marks not accurate. Because if it spins by 4 degrees or 10 degrees, then all of a sudden it's not accurate by that amount. Brian Tooley, Comp Cam Stage 3, Pack 660 springs, Texas Speed, ported heads, titanium retainers, and hats. I don't know, chrome only push rods, L6 manifold is my application. Can I run boost? Yeah, you can run boost on that without any problem. Can you go big and actually lose horsepower? You can. Like if I don't know if I included it in the 175 horse power camshaft video where I gained 175 horsepower by putting a camshaft in. Now, before you guys all go nuts, it's a 408 with AFR heads and a fast manifold and 11-to-1, and it's a 408 with long tube headers. And so I ran the stock LM7 camshaft and then like a 239, 255 kind of camshaft. So it picked up a lot of power. Where was I going with this? Now we got lost. Oh, yeah, and we can lose power. So we went to the camshaft that made that power was a 240, 246, low 600, typical kind of thing. So 240, 246. So we thought, okay, we're going to try, since this is a big motor, it's got lots of head, got lots of intake manifold, we're going to try a 246, 254 camshaft. Well, what happened with that camshaft is it didn't make any more peak power. It made about the same peak power, but it lost power everywhere else in the curve. So for 6,000 RPM, it made less power than the small camshaft and only made as much at the power peak as the other camshaft did. So for that combination of cylinder head and displacement and most probably intake manifold, there was a limit, at least, and not a limit because it's not an absolute thing. But those two camshafts didn't really change the power output other than losing a whole bunch by going to the bigger camshaft. Have you ever tested the power losing BT? I didn't know that it was a power losing one against what's a bread loaf intake manifold? I don't even know what that is. Intake manifolds, Pro Street Mafia, intake manifolds are RPM specific. A short runner BTR intake manifold wants to run better at high RPM. A stock truck manifold wants to run better at low RPM. And like 6,000 or 6,500 is the low RPM. And so those short runner manifolds, like a high ram, like that BTR one, like the Holley makes one, and I think Texas Speed makes one, and all those are all high RPM deals. That it's RPM specific. 351 Windsor out of a 95 Bronco, GT40P heads, ported and polished. Make sure that you make it so that you can put enough spring in those GT40P heads. Excuse me, and that you have enough, and you have the right exhaust for it. But you can go with the 274 style cam or even something a little bigger than that on a 351 and it'll work good. I don't know what you're trying to do. Is it going to be just a drive around thing? Is it going to be an off-road deal? Are you not racing it or whatever? So I err more toward the milder cams if it's a drive around kind of thing, and then go bigger in the camshaft if you're wanting to get more sporty. Although on a 351, unless you're doing a really good job on the porting on the GT40P heads, those are going to kind of be the limiting factor. And you didn't tell me what intake manifold you're running either, because that would be a big thing. Dual plane. Oh, and L rock air gap. That's good. Yeah, so I would pick 274 in that range. A 224, 232 would be a good combination for that. Man, hey Richard, big fan. Do you have a somewhat budget cylinder head for 302? The most budget head for that is the GT40 or GT40P from the Explorer from the Wrecking Yard. That's your cheapest date if you want to do that. There are other low dollar like the Airflow Research Enforcer or stuff from Summit or the Skip White stuff. Although a lot of that stuff I haven't tested firsthand, so I can't tell you exactly what they do. Does intake runner cross-section area determine ideal displacement? No. You have an intake man. Like, to give you an idea, a dual plane RPM air gap on a small block Ford can be used on a 260-inch small block Ford. It can also be used on a, I don't know how big, I think that the biggest 8.2 deck motor I've ever seen is 408 inches or 410 inches. So it can be used on all of those, on all of that range. And I don't think that there's an optimum amount based on the displacement. I think it would come into the displacement would affect where that thing is going to run in terms of RPM. But I would be more concerned with, or as concerned with maybe the airflow potential, depending on what power output that combination had. Like if you had a 410-inch motor like these guys did, that was like a 700 horsepower motor, an RPM air gap is not going to be a good choice for that. Not specifically for the displacement, but for the power output. It's the same thing for a 302. If you're making a 650 horsepower 302 that's going to turn 8,000 or more, that's also not a good choice for that because of its RPM. So I would look at more things rather than just that. I think Extrude Hone still does 5-liter intakes. FR205, 351, FCAM, 80 millimeter. Yeah, that's an 80 millimeter is 1,000 horsepower turbo. That's the answer to all the rest of the stuff is just along for the ride. Leo, what's the? You need to not do that anymore. I think one of the reasons why it's hard to get 4-bolt small blocks anymore. Are all of the late model like as an L31 block, are all of those 4-bolt mains? I don't know if they are or not. Yeah, I don't know what Leo was doing. I don't understand. The L31s are 2-bolt. Okay. So we didn't have trouble with the heads lifting on the Big Bang motor at 30 pounds. And we were at 1,500 and something horsepower. There was a transition to 2-bolt for additional material to do the splayed cap setup. Tick Torque Max versus BTR Trek Norris. I don't think I've ever run the Tick cam. Chen, you're changing different things when you're changing cross-section area than when you're changing runner length. The Big Bang motor was not an aluminum block. It was an iron 6-liter. You need to do some old Chevy 283s with 601, 305 HO heads. I know that, and I've got to get going, but I remember people telling me that this was one of the reasons that everybody told me before I did the 6-liter Big Bang stuff when we were doing the 4.8 and the 5.3 stuff, that everybody said, yeah, the 5.3 is the way to go because you're definitely going to lose head gaskets when you run the 6-liter because there's less meat in between, obviously, in between the cylinders because you have a 4-inch bore instead of a 3.780 bore. So they have, better sealing. And I'm like, and then the other thing was that you can't use a stock head because the deck thickness of the head will not allow high boost level stuff. And so that's going to be a problem too. Well, we did both of those. And obviously the dyno is not the same thing as doing it at the track. And although we had 70 or 80 runs above 1,000 horsepower on some of these things, we didn't have the problem. So I think that I don't know if the people that were telling us were people that didn't have actual track experience doing that, or if they were just people that were using like this internet level of logic and applying that to what they were seeing. Okay, a 6-liter is a bigger bore. That would mean it, given the dimensions of the block, that there is less surface area between the cylinders, and so if there's less surface area, by logic, we would assume that there's not enough or not as much sealing going on there. So that's where we're going to blow the head gasket. But we didn't do that. We didn't see that, and we didn't when we were running the stock head stuff at 1,300 horsepower or so. And I think on the Big Bang 6-liter, the Gen 3 motor, we ran ported 317 heads. So we even had stock heads on that. And so we didn't lose head gaskets on the 6-liter and didn't lose head gaskets on the 6-liter with the stock heads on it. So the heads didn't deform because they have thin decks. Now, I'm not saying that isn't a thing. I'm sure that it is. And maybe more prevalent when everything's not exactly right, like it is on the dyno. That works very well. So I would take some of those things maybe with a grain of salt. And I understand the difference between this not being optimum, this being better, but does this still work with what you're trying to do? If I was going to run more than 30 pounds or 40 or 50 pounds or whatever and try to, and not even the boost so much as whatever that power output is, if I was trying to make a 2,000 horsepower motor, I probably wouldn't use a stock block and I wouldn't use a stock head. And I might even at that point be concerned about the bore size. But for the stuff that we're doing for these street motors, I'm not concerned about any of that stuff. I don't have any experience running nitromethane. I've never run it on anything. And I think maybe I'm thinking that the guys from West Tech have, but I have never done that. Yeah, J-Car, you're not going to need very much power for that. talking about adding 200 horsepower. So, you know, I don't know, 7 or 8 pounds or something, not very much. Topic, have you built an older L28 straight 6? I built a 260Z engine, but not on the dyno, though. We just had it in the car. Have you experimented with old school bus setups, meaning no intercore? How does the school bus get involved in that? Have you found any cams for the 2.2 yet? I have not. old school boost, not bus. I know, that's what I want to know. Who's boosting an old school bus? Oh, okay. I got to get going. I must get going. I got stuff to do. Thank you guys all for showing up. The next video is going up is going to be the E303 versus the E303 Plus cam. So that will be good stuff. And then I'm going to try to work the exhaust test in there, and then also the extreme energy stuff too, because so I did some more testing. So a lot of cool stuff. Thank you guys all for showing up, and I will see you all tomorrow.